University of Texas Energy Symposium for Tuesday, September 9th, 2025. I'm Kerry King, research scientist and assistant director at the Energy Institute, part of the office that sponsors the UT Energy Symposium. Before I highlight and introduce our speaker for today, I will point out the upcoming talks coming the next 2 weeks. Next week, we'll have our own Sheldon Landsberger as professor in mechanical engineering and studies nuclear engineering. He will talk about naturally occurring radioactive material in the oil and gas exploration field. Following that, we'll have a talk by Adam Grosser, who's chairman and managing partner of Up Partners, who are a venture capital and venture labs firm. And he will have an optimistic view of the rapidly evolving physical technology landscape. So we'll get a viewpoint on innovation and investing and new technologies related to energy and transportation, robotics, and perhaps AI. Today, it is a pleasure to have Sanya Carley. She is here, I think, the second time, very rare accomplishment. So congratulations to her for people requesting that she come on, which is why I've invited her again. She is the Mark Allen Hughes Faculty Director of the Kleinman Center, Presidential Distinguished Professor of Energy Policy and CD Planning at the Stuart Weitzman School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania. She holds a secondary appointment at the Wharton School. She's also a university fellow at the Resources for the Future. She co-directs the Energy Justice Lab, which will be related to our talk today. Her research focuses on energy justice and just transitions, energy insecurity, electricity and transportation markets, and public perceptions of energy infrastructure and technologies. She also built and maintains the utility disconnection dashboard. She has degrees or PhD in public policy from University of North Carolina, master's from University of Wisconsin at Madison, and a bachelor's degree in economics and sustainable development and from Swarthmore. So she is fitting our multidisciplinary bucket today. The abstract of her talk is that 1 in 4 Americans experience energy insecurity on a regular basis, and millions are disconnected from their energy service providers annually due to an inability to pay their bills. So in this talk, she will present research findings on the incidence and contributors toward energy security and utility disconnections, and how households cope when facing these conditions. She'll also present insights on policies that can address energy insecurity, how policymakers can modify these policies to account for increasing incidence of extreme heat. So with that said, I will now hand it over to Sanya and remind everyone to please ask questions via the question and answer feature of Zoom or on YouTube if you're watching there. We'll be looking. If your question is relevant for clarification, I will try to interject in the middle. Otherwise, we'll hold most questions until the end, but please present your question at any time. That's it. Sanya, go ahead, share your screen, and the floor is yours.
Will do. Thank you, Kerry. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming out. It's nice to see several folks in the audience that are friends and colleagues. And maybe I'll just start by noting that I'm moving offices. If you're worried about me not reading books, I promise I read books. They're just all in boxes. Okay, so I'm planning to talk today about energy insecurity and utility disconnections within America. And just to lay the land, more or less, I'm pulling from a larger body of my research that I've conducted with colleagues at the Energy Justice Lab focused on energy insecurity and utility disconnections. And this is many years of work in the making. And the first 3 items that I'll talk about here is kind of setting the stage for what is energy insecurity and giving you some statistics, identifying the incidence of energy insecurity and disconnections, discussing how households cope. And then the second half of the presentation is thinking about several policy solutions, of which it's really just scratching the surface. There's so many different kinds of levers, if you will, that different entities can pull, but I'll highlight just a few that are quite near and dear to my heart. So to begin, energy insecurity is when a household struggles to pay their energy bills or to keep their house at an affordable level. And each year in the United States, we know from government data, specifically from the Residential Energy Consumption Survey, that 1 in 4 households struggle to pay their energy bills or experience energy insecurity. Now, in our work and others, we tend to define energy insecurity as kind of an escalating scale, if you will, where first a household may struggle to pay their bills. At some point, without paying their bills and having arrearages, they will receive a disconnection notice. And they then have so much time to pay their bills. If they don't, then they will encounter the third stage of energy insecurity, which is being physically disconnected from their service provider, whether it's a gas provider, electricity, or in other cases, also, we could extend it to water, other public services. Now, as Carrie noted, our team runs what's called the Utility Disconnection Dashboard. And this is essentially a dashboard of two things, both disconnections that occur across the United States, as well as disconnection protections that are in place across the states. So you can go here and you can look at by service territory, for example, or by state, by year, by month, where disconnections are most prevalent. Now, we know from the data that at the dashboard that approximately 3 million households had their electricity or gas shut off due to non-payment of a utility bill in the year 2024. Now, I'll just caution us to say that this number is a drastic underestimate. This is less than 10% of all utilities, and these are the utilities that are mandated to report these data, and it's less than 50% of the total customer base, or all utility consumers essentially across the United States. So if we were to just double this number, assuming that the data that are missing match the data that we have, we can assume that at least 6 million households were disconnected this past year. Without access to electricity or power, one can't power their devices. They can't plug in their phone. They can't therefore seek help. They may not be able to access different resources, such as through their phone or their computers. They can't run a refrigerator to keep healthy, perishable food. They may not be able to run electronic medical equipment, that they may rely on for their lives, and they may struggle to keep their body temperatures warm or cool, depending on the season. And we know from a robust empirical body of literature that there are quite dire consequences of these conditions. We know that households that are energy insecure are more commonly living in conditions of poverty. They tend to have acute and chronic health conditions that are exacerbated by the incidence of energy insecurity. And we know that children are more likely to face a variety of dire consequences, including hospitalization, other medical conditions, and developmental delays. Now, we also know that the condition of energy insecurity and disconnection can lead to death in not at all rare cases. And I've just highlighted a few here of some more recent, some less recent. I guess all 2015 is the latest, but some as recent as 2022 of stories of individuals dying. Many of these are actually not from the actual condition of sitting in too hot of a house or too cold of a house, but actually due to coping strategies that these households engage in order to try to get by, such as sitting in the car and running the car in a closed space to get warm, or running a space heater next to the home or next to the bed as somebody sleeps. So in our work at the Energy Justice Lab, we've repeatedly, through multiple studies, asked the question of who exactly is energy insecure? Is there uneven incidence? Are there certain communities or demographics that tend to be more likely disconnected specifically? And I've just highlighted a few of our articles down at the bottom. Some of these articles are based on longitudinal survey data that we've gathered, in particular, a longitudinal data set that we conducted through the main year of COVID, the first year of COVID. And then others, in particular, the article on the right, Nature Communications, is using actual disconnection data in the state of California, which is a little bit more granular than just the state level. And we can get down into the service territory level. Now, the results across these studies are remarkably consistent in telling a story about who is more insecure across America. And here I've enumerated them for us. The first is those households that have exposed, inefficient, or deficient conditions. They have cracks in the wall, for example, mold, exposed sockets, broken HVAC systems, broken refrigerators. They're all more likely to struggle from energy insecurity as well as be disconnected. Two, we know that households with somebody who relies on an electronic medical device are significantly more likely and consistently across every study to be disconnected, which has encouraged us to do a separate, pretty basic kind of descriptive analysis about what are the actual costs of running these devices, these electronic medical devices, or durable medical equipment, as it's referred to in the medical field. And in this article, we actually conducted, we basically back of the envelope calculations as to how much one's, excuse me, as to how much one's bills go up as a result of running 11 very common pieces of equipment, such as like an oxygen concentrator. And what we find is that it can increase bills by several hundred, including in Hawaii, which is the most extreme case, by $500 per month, which really explains quite a bit as to why people who are relying on these devices are more likely to be disconnected, because they have to pay so much more for energy. Now, here's some descriptive details to highlight the third trend, is that we find that households of color are significantly more likely to be disconnected in particular than white households. And this is just looking at the raw data. I noted that we have this longitudinal data set over the course of the first year of the pandemic. And if you could just compare here the blue bars for a second across a household that identifies as white versus a household that identifies as Black, and you can see that it's about twice as likely that a household that identifies as Black is more likely to say that they can't pay their energy bills. But then if you look at the yellow bars, you can see that a Black household is 3 times more likely to be disconnected, and a Hispanic household is 4 times more likely to be disconnected than a white household. Now, the fourth major indicator of incidence of energy insecurity is that households are lower income. And here I'm going to distinguish between just struggling to pay your energy bill and actually being disconnected. And I think there's some important nuance here that you can see that those households that are the lowest of income, they tend to struggle more to pay their energy bills, but yet you actually see their disconnection rates are relatively flat across these different income groupings, if you will. So there's a difference in the incidence of being able to pay your bill, but not in terms of disconnections like we saw for households of color. Fifth, we found through our research that households with young children are significantly more likely to be disconnected. If you compare just the yellow bars here, you can see that they are 3 times more likely to be disconnected. So this is households that have children under the age of 5. And in our work, I don't believe that there's universal kind of empirical evidence of this, but in many places across the United States, if a household is disconnected, then the child might be removed from the household from child services, by child services, because the house is deemed not livable, which of course has much bigger, longer term developmental implications for these children. Sixth, we find that those households that have been insecure previously, that is, say you've been disconnected before, then the chances of you being disconnected again in the future is much higher. So I liken this to a cycle of sorts. If you're struggling to pay your bills and you're shut off, you then face a variety of quite dire consequences, especially economically and also potentially socially, where you may have disconnection fees or reconnection fees, or establishing a new account fees. You may have lost food within your fridge. You may have legal service fees and a variety of other costs, which then likely sets you back on your next bill once you have recovered, which can then subsequently lead to a shutoff, including in the case if you're deemed more risky as a household for being shut off, that the utility company, depending on their protocols and their procedures, may be more inclined to disconnect you as well. And then we also find in our work, specifically using the California disconnection data, that weather patterns increase these trends. So if you're in a place, a region that has particularly hot temperatures, then you're disconnected more, or in a place with particularly cold weather, then you're disconnected more as well. So then I'll switch to the topic, very much related, of just, well, what do households do when they're facing these conditions, if they're facing the possibility that they'll be disconnected? And the question here is just, how do households cope? And here I've highlighted a few of what we heard going into this study, kind of anecdotally, were different ways of potentially coping. You take out loans, you open your oven for space heat, so you run, whether it's your gas or your electric oven, and then you open the door. You run a space heater, or what we've heard is quite common going into the study is bill balancing, where essentially a household is strategically paying down one bill one month and another bill in next, or each of them, just to the point of kind of avoiding a catastrophic outcome where the threshold for eviction, for example, or disconnection is just met. So in a study that we published a few years ago, the question is, how do households cope? And what we found here, I'll summarize in just a few ways. One is we found, this is low-income households in particular, those within 200% of the federal poverty line over the course of a full year. And we found that more than half, in fact, 55% of these households engaged in some of these coping strategies and on a very regular basis. And many of them engaged in multiple strategies at once. So it wasn't just that a household was running a space heater, for example. They were doing multiple kind of behavioral and financial techniques to get by. I'll also point out that the things that we found that were most common, which are highlighted here as dark blue bars, were also the riskiest strategies. So I'll just run through these quickly. The first is accruing debt, where with this representative sample of low-income households, we can say that 27% of all low-income households accrue debt on a regular basis. That is, they take on debt on their utility bills. And 26% engage in some kind of risky temperature behavior. Now, these behaviors in our sample are exclusively to stay warm. They include such things such as space heaters and opening the oven or flaring the gas range, as I noted before. But it also includes things such as burning trash in the home or running a dryer and disconnecting the dryer vent and putting somebody behind it while it runs in order to warm somebody's body. 18% strategically balance their bills, as I just noted, and 17% forego other expenses such as on food or healthcare. Now, the less common techniques include 11% of low-income households seek out government assistance, such as bill assistance through the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program or other kinds of local bill assistance programs. And only 10% tap into their personal networks asking for friends, and 6% call up the utility company to talk to them about the situation and to look into payment plans, for example. Only 6%, so less than in single digits. And 2% take out formal loans, such as a payday loan. So now that we have a general overview of the incidence of this challenge, I'm going to talk about several policy solutions that we've investigated quite deeply in our work at the Energy Justice Lab. And here I'm going to return to this sequence, if you will, of energy insecurity: struggling to pay your bill, receiving a notice, and being disconnected. And what I'm doing here is kind of imposing on it several policy options along this temporal timeline. Now, this is not prescriptive. It doesn't have to be perfect. Many of these things can help at any given stage of energy insecurity. But I think it's helpful for identifying a point of intervention for policies. Now, on the bottom, we see more government policies, such as in the early stage, what I call preventative solutions. We have things that lower energy bills to help a household avoid the incidence of energy insecurity at all, such as providing energy efficiency or weatherization, or providing residential solar, for example, or distributed generation. Bill assistance can help at multiple phases throughout this process. Disconnection protections, as I'll talk about more extensively in a minute, can help one avoid disconnection at that final phase, and debt relief can help essentially reset that cycle or break that cycle rather, so that households don't perpetually become trapped in this cycle of energy insecurity. And then on the top in blue, I have several kinds of payment plans or bill assistance that utilities can offer. Now, utilities can either choose to do these voluntarily or the state government might impose them, but there are a variety of different kinds of payment plans, such as, the fairly standard, the average payment plan that you're over the course of a year, it's the average per month. And then there's more sophisticated plans as well, including the percentage of income payment plan based on what your income is and a set threshold of what is deemed appropriate for how much you pay, as well as an arrearage management plan to essentially help a household recover their debt over time, or to lower their debt over time. Now, I'm just going to focus quickly on 3 of these policies, specifically residential solar bill assistance through the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program and disconnection protections, and talk about some ways that I think, especially given modern circumstances, climate change, increased incidence of extreme heat, that we could do a better job with some of these policies. I'll just note here really quickly, there's other ways I think to conceptualize some of these policy interventions, not just on that timeline or that scale, but also we could divide them into what I think are kind of preventative to help households avoid becoming energy insecure, temporary relief to really just help them avoid catastrophic problems, and then long-term management to really help households recover and to break this cycle. So the first policy type, if you will, is a technology intervention that I'd like to focus. And the question here of our work is whether residential solar reduce the incidence of energy insecurity, or otherwise phrased, is residential solar an effective preventative metric or measure or intervention for energy insecurity? So in this study, in 2023, we sent a survey out to low to moderate income households all across the United States. And essentially what we did was we took all households that had adopted solar in the year 2021, every single one of them that were low to moderate income. And we had this full sample of them. And then we matched with every observable characteristic that we had access to that was relevant, of course, these households with solar to non-solar households. And we did so with very close matches geographically, as well as matches that weren't constrained to geography. And we employed a variety of different databases to do this, but then really what the main data that we used in the end were these survey questions about the incidence of energy insecurity. And here's the main results of this study. So we found that those with residential solar were 46% less likely to receive a notice for disconnection, 44% more likely to be able to pay their electricity bill, 34% less likely to forego other expenses such as food and healthcare, 21% less likely to keep their home at a uncomfortable temperature, and 15% less likely to reduce energy consumption. So all of these were fairly substantial effects, all statistically significant. We also wondered whether the benefits of solar would spill over to other energy bills. If you recall this kind of bill balancing, where if you have such a fixed budget, such a budget that's so constraining, then of course you can only pay so much of your bills. And so if you recover money through solar, does it help you with other bills? And what we found is that it does. So the question in the survey was, in roughly the past 3 months, was there ever a time that your household could not pay a blank bill? And we found that with solar, that households were much more likely to be able to pay their gas bill, and as well as fairly weak, small effects on wood and propane. So then I'll shift to a second policy area, and this is bill assistance. And specifically, I'll pick on, if you will, though lightly, because I think that this program is profoundly important, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. And this is just a map from the fabulous source that I hope you're all familiar with, the Visualizing Energy website, where you can go and work kind of dynamically with these really great maps and graphics and visuals. But this is just displaying the distribution of funds of this bill assistance, which I would argue, again, is a very kind of temporary relief for households that are struggling to pay their energy bills. What you can see from this map is the kind of the allocation of LIHEAP is fairly inconsistent across space. And I'll note that LIHEAP historically, the way that it was designed was to match its predecessor program that was adopted in 1980. And then the LIHEAP came along the next year, 1981, essentially to expand the original program to include not just cold weather states, which was what the original program was, but also hot weather states. But in the way that it was designed, it introduced a variety of provisions that are called hold harmless provisions that essentially still allocated a lot of the money to cold weather places, which is largely what we see to this point. Now, I've argued in a recent piece that LIHEAP has a variety of challenges, not just based on the allocation, but also based on modern circumstances of climate change and increased heat. So the challenges I would put into a few buckets here. Overall, the amount of money that is given to LIHEAP is woefully inadequate for the actual need. At most, in any given year, 20% of households that need it actually receive it. The process of allocating funds are fairly opaque. They're based on data that we and others have struggled to replicate. The funding over time is inconsistent. It's constantly a kind of a political battle as to whether LIHEAP funds come through. And one challenge for many states, now, though not all, are that once the funds are allocated, they typically are given in the colder months. And for some states, most of the money, on average, I understand it's about 70% of the funds are already exhausted by the summer months. So during these months that are every single year hotter and hotter and hotter, there are fewer funds that are available to actually use to offset your bill payments through this program. As noted, this program also allocates, is favoring essentially the cold weather states despite this increased incidence of extreme heat. And I would argue that energy poverty and energy insecurity could be a deeper part of kind of the consideration and calculation as to how it's allocated. So here with the challenges, I essentially suggest a lot of the opportunities, which are just the opposite. Let's think about how to increase appropriations, how to disperse funds in a way that they are around still in the hottest months. How do we modernize our funding formula to give more weight to hotter places? And how do we target the outreach for households that we know are particularly vulnerable, such as those households that I highlighted earlier, such as those that rely on electronic medical devices or have small children. Now, the last policy I'll feature here briefly is utility disconnection protections. And disconnection protections essentially are those that are in place that a state mandates that the utilities that are regulated in that state are not allowed to disconnect people if certain conditions are met. This is typically either a date-based or a temperature-based threshold. So the dates, an example would be from November to February, nobody can be disconnected. Or a temperature would be if it's below 20 degrees on any given day, then somebody can't be disconnected. There's also other protections for households with children, which is actually only 4 states, very small, or people that are medically compromised. And in those cases, one has to have I would say, quite extreme set of documentation to prove that and anticipatory documentation to prove that they comply with the medical exemptions. Now, this map just reveals some of the standards across different places where you can see cold protections are far more common than our hot protections. As of just a few months ago, we now have 24 states that have some kind of heat-based protection. Though many of them, if you note the asterisks, there are many places that have kind of contingencies, if you will, which basically a state might say, you can't be disconnected if it's between these months and it's below a certain temperature or above a certain temperature. So you have to meet both conditions at once, which I would argue pretty further diminishes the efficacy or maybe just the expanse of these programs. Now, a few other data here. This is looking at age-based protections. As I noted, only 4 states have protections for young households with young children. 14 have protections for those with elderly residents, and 11 have those with individuals that have documented disabilities. And then you can see that the medical protections are more common. 45 has some kind of medical protections. And you need a certificate in 41 of those places. And you need to show evidence of some kind of payment agreement that you're on in 16 places in order to have protection. I will note that these protections are commonly very complicated and very hard to follow. And I'm picking on Connecticut here for a minute. So this is Connecticut's policy. It's a date-based protection from November to May. It's not a temperature-based. And I'll just highlight a few things here. So they basically say this is a hardship policy. You are entitled to have these services between these dates, even if you owe the utility company money, except if the gas heat service was provided during prior winter based on hardship and the service was turned off between these very specific dates, then to get your service turned back on, the customer must pay the lesser of $100 and so forth. My read of this is it's incredibly complicated and very hard to follow, even though I've read these lines many, many times. Also note that customers must apply for hardship protection at the utility every fall. So they need to anticipate this ahead of time and apply for hardship. And then I'll just note that there's some other stipulations. No disconnect for 15 days for illness certified by the physician. No disconnection for households with a baby 24 months old or younger that has discharge papers from a hospital in which the attending physician indicated that service was essential. So this means if somebody has a baby, they need to know before they're dispatched from the hospital that their baby may be compromised in the future because they aren't able to pay to keep their lights on. I mean, it's just incredibly onerous, and it takes foresight that I think most people wouldn't necessarily have. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here for growth and enhancement. Thinking about the utility companies, I would say 3 in particular. One is information provision. It's so important to very clearly specify exactly what the specification, like exactly what the needs are. How many days will you have until you're disconnected? How many days do you have after you get your notice until disconnection? Exactly how much do you have to pay down? And that information should be prominently displayed, both through mailers, but also through the website. Second, I think it's important to establish a date range when customers can pay their bills before being considered late or delinquent. Not all utilities have this. And it's important to provide information to customers on promotions that they have, such as different kinds of bill assistance or like the PIP program or the AMP program, as I mentioned before. And then I think there's a lot of opportunities for state policymakers, and I have 6 here. I think it's important to have easily understandable and transparent language that seek to reduce administrative burdens. The second is to combine temperature and date-based protections, not make it so that you have to have both, but that it's an either-or situation. And I think this is especially important with increased incidence of extreme weather, which could include shoulder months as well. It's important to have broad definitions of medical conditions and delays so that one knows exactly what kinds of certificates they need. I think we could do better of expanding protections for households, especially with young children, but also for others who are compromised. States can establish a minimum arrearage before disconnections occur. And this last point is about kind of the renter-tenant relationship, that tenants shouldn't have to suffer through disconnection if the landlord fails to pay the bills. So I'll just wrap up with just a few slides here, a summary of the main findings. Descriptively and empirically, we've seen that energy insecurity and disconnections is a pervasive problem. It affects millions of American households. We see uneven incidence across geographies and social demographic groups. We see cyclical incidence over time, and we also observe that households resort to dangerous alternatives. We know that these conditions can be worse under certain spaces, such as if you have inefficient or non-weatherized homes, if you rely on electronic medical devices, or in the condition of extreme weather. And we know that there's a variety of policy and other solutions that can help. There's no silver bullet, but there are efforts that are both preventative, there are short-term relief, and there's kind of long-term management. And we've provided evidence in some of these studies that there's some efficacy, particularly, for example, with residential solar or with tighter disconnection protections. These are several research questions that are really top of mind for me going forward with this work. Thinking more deeply, for example, of other preventative actions to reduce energy insecurity and testing them in live environments in field trials, essentially to ensure the efficacy here. The second is thinking about how many lives a state can save by introducing heat-based protections. So just, again, testing how well these protections work when they're fully binding. Thinking about whether one's surrounding environment, the type of home they live in, the tree canopy that they live under, the grid that they have in their local area, how these things affect the incidence of disconnections in particular. I'm also interested in whether discounted rates affect the incidence of disconnections, such as PIP programs, for example, whether there are alternative kinds of approaches to bill assistance, and then more generally thinking deeply about kind of the true cost of disconnections for society, not just for the consumer, but also for the utility and for society generally, and how we can better improve some of these processes. I'll end with a really shameless plug for a book of mine that's coming out mid-October. I think October 13th is the launch date or the in-stores date. It's called Power Lines, The Human Cost of American Energy and Transition, written with my colleague and co-author David Kaniski at the Energy Justice Lab. And this book is essentially about the challenges of those that are on the front lines of our energy transition, including stories of those who have been disconnected and face rather high incidence of energy insecurity, but also integrated into other stories of other communities, such as frontline coal communities, for example, auto worker communities, those that house the burdens of our energy system, such as the burdens of our electronic waste and others. So stay tuned for that if you're interested in these topics. And I'll go ahead and stop my share here and let Carrie take it over with questions.
Right, thank you. Excellent. Yeah, one of your slides there made me really kind of think someone has to get a note from their doctor if they have a baby to say that having electricity is important, and I think, well, clearly it's important, but there are people arguing, well, it's not absolutely critical, I guess, in a modern world to have electricity access for a 2-year-old or 1-year-old. So I don't know if there's any doctors who will write a note that says, no, this is not necessary for this child. I don't know if anybody does that. So, okay, well, we
I
do
think
have.
your point is an
Yeah.
important one, though. Is
Yeah.
that in the United States, we don't recognize energy or electricity as critical, or either a critical good or an enabling good. But I would argue that it's both of those. We just don't formally recognize it as such, and therefore our policies and procedures kind of match that lack of recognition.
Right. Right. Okay, well, we do have some questions here. So, maybe I'll go to this. Oh, well, maybe I'll start at the beginning. Yeah, well, it was hot topic of the day, artificial intelligence, crypto, and these kind of things. Do you have any insights into how potential, more electricity demand on the grid from these industries, in this case AI, and how much this might affect energy insecurity, or how much is related to just the cost of electricity in a general area anyway?
Yeah. Well, we're seeing a lot of projections right now about costs going up specifically because of this massive increase in demand and the need to build more infrastructure. There are some places that are trying to protect the customers from essentially those that are already on the grid, residential customers in particular, from absorbing all those costs. But there are a lot of other places that aren't having those conversations yet. So I think it's undoubtedly going to be the case that energy insecurity will become much worse in many places across the country as a result of data center and other AI build out.
Yeah, are those policies related to just sort of changing how rates are for industrial or commercial customers versus residential, or something more complicated?
Well, I think it could be both. It could be partnerships with the company that's building it out so that they own the system, they
Hmm.
own the new supply that they need to generate. It could be partnerships in order to ensure that they pick up a disproportionate amount of the bills, or rather, we could say a proportionate amount of the bills, so that it doesn't have to be cross subsidized by other customers. But I think you're exactly right. The remainder of the story is about rate design, and I think now is a critical time to think deeply about rate design across different customer classes and to confront these like very large modern challenges.
Right. Here's a question on, did you look at, or do you know of, any correlations per se of this energy insecurity, any metrics and distribution, or the grid mix, like if there's more wind or solar in a particular area uh, related to the electricity bills, or do we know if this is the case or not?
That's a good question. I haven't looked at that. One could, though, if you're interested, you could go to the utility disconnection dashboard, and I would suggest taking as granular, as refined a geographic location as you possibly could. So choosing a service territory or those states. There's 6 at the moment that have zip code level data, and using those data overlapped with production numbers to see if there is a correlation.
Right. Um, Well, I guess this is kind of a related question. That's sort of the flip side of the solar wind question.
Mhm.
Um, Current administration seems focused on propping up old fossil fuel generators, and maybe utilities are looking at maximizing profits or changing the mix, or I don't know. So yeah, do you see this affecting energy insecurity, or it's all part of sort of the general story, or is this kind of a particular new change to think about?
I think it's a new change for the administration to work so actively to prop up facilities that were planned for decommissioning or planned for retirement, forcing them to run. I think there's deep implications, just like there are for data centers, that this will inevitably add to the costs of the system, and those costs need to be absorbed by somebody. I think what we will see is that there will be a growing incidence of those households that are energy insecure, right? The energy burden for households will go up. And so those that are currently on the margins or on the fringe of being energy insecure will likely become insecure in the future if these costs continue to go up.
Right. It's a question kind of related to your um, survey on low income LMI households that have residential solar.
Mhm.
Do you have more details about who paid, or how were the solar panels paid for? Was the payment for those installation? Uh, is there some assistance in that? And I guess perhaps the follow on is, maybe once you have the solar, it's obviously easier to pay the electric bill, maybe, but is it harder to pay some other bill? And I don't know. It's just another level of complication of the study. But any insights there, or information about how these were typically paid for?
I do. Yeah, we were able to control actually for how the panels were paid for. So we found that it didn't actually, surprisingly, it didn't make a difference as to whether it was government subsidized or whether the household paid entirely for the solar panels. Which, of course, it's not a huge fraction of the households that could, but we found that somewhere around 50% were actually able to pay for the majority of the panels, and it didn't make a difference as to what the reported outcomes were.
Right. Okay.
Yep. I will note, I mean, maybe this is of interest to some. Clearly, the causal mechanism of this solar story is about lowering bills on a regular basis. But I think that there's a part of the story as well about autonomy, energy autonomy, and one owning their own energy. And one owns their own energy, they may make different decisions about how to use it, for example, that could also have implications for their connection with utility companies and with their disconnections.
Right. Okay. Well, it's just a question about the LIHEAP program.
Mhm.
I guess that money is uh, allocated by the federal government. I believe at least that particular program, but maybe there's other state-based programs. But as a general question, you have an idea of how much money you would allocate to the LIHEAP program? You say, well, it needs more money. Do you have an
I know
idea of
exactly
what it
what
is now, or how much more you would recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't kind of backed out a calculation. I'm sure we could pretty quickly with a back of the envelope calculation. But currently, for the last several years, it's been about 4 billion. There were during COVID, there was a spike year where several billions more were allocated. I think it was up to six, if I'm not mistaken. Um, this coming year, it's not clear exactly what will happen. The President Trump in his proposed budget zeroed out the LIHEAP program entirely. I will note that the Trump administration has also laid off everyone in the HHS office that oversees the LIHEAP program, which will make it incredibly difficult to administer this program going forward. But in the most recent proposed bill, I understand that it was not just 4 billion, it was a little bit more. It was somewhat under just shy of 5 billion that was allocated for LIHEAP this coming year. So that's our current status, but it's to be continued, to be determined. What would be the ideal? I will happily take you up on that suggestion to do that calculation after this. I mean, I think it's not just about throwing money at the problem. It's really about kind of effectively managing these funds as well to appropriately target them to the households that really need them. I would also argue that maybe we could do a better job with allocating LIHEAP. Maybe instead of just having it as this one-time payment to the utilities, maybe households could manage their own LIHEAP if they're eligible for it every year. Maybe they can track these funds over time. Maybe they could give a little each month in a way that's more kind of consistent with the way that they pay their bills. And this is where I think we need to be really creative about trying to figure out solutions to these policies in the field in real time.
Right. I think I also don't know a back of the envelope calculation I did once to just say how much money I thought it would be to get all energy burden metrics above or spending less than 8% or something on
Yeah.
of their budget or something.
Do you
Uh,
remember what your calculation was?
no, I don't
That would
remember what the
be,
number was, but
yeah, same general concept, just a different set of metrics, right?
yeah, it was a
Yeah.
much simpler calculation to do. So, um, but here's some other LIHEAP questions. You sort of highlighted again a little bit there, how it's allocated, or at least you're implying the money goes to utilities and then they distribute the money. So it's some sort of clarifying or following up questions. Why does it prioritize allocating towards colder states more than warmer states or colder weather areas? And then um, is it should it be, or just clarify if it would be allocated to states that have a higher average electricity rates, like says like California, for example, and then maybe you could highlight, yeah, the difference between the rate, right, the dollar per kilowatt hour versus the how many kilowatt hours you consume and the total
Yeah.
expenditures, which is what I like to think about. So
Yeah.
yeah, just a little bit more on allocations, how it works, and then
Sure.
how
Yeah.
maybe it could work. You were highlighting that.
Happy to. Yeah. So when LIHEAP was first introduced, it was a time of more extreme cold. I mean, not relative to today, but it was regular for it to be cold, and it was not so regular for the summer months to be incredibly hot. I grew up in Wisconsin. There was snow outside all the time that we had to shovel in order to to get to school uphill both ways every day. Right? It was cold. Our house was very cold. We had to wear sweaters, multiple layers of sweaters, growing up in our house because it was kept so cold. Partly a issue of my parents' decisions and our financial decisions, but also a factor of where we grew up. Anyway, that was the time when LIHEAP was first introduced. It was more common for households to struggle to pay their energy bills during these cold months. We are now in a very different environment, literally, where climate change and extreme heat is far more common. As I noted before, every single summer is the hottest summer on record. It just continues to go up. And that's why I think we need to modernize this policy so that we're accounting for that heat as well. The reason that we're sticking, or that LIHEAP is still kind of a cold weather condition, is that the program is just pegged to when it was first adopted, and all of the modifications every year kind of reinforce the precedent of who got the money the year before, and it's more or less continuing to perpetuate over time. Carrie, I'm trying to, your second question about LIHEAP. Oh, in terms of generation, in terms of price.
Yeah,
Yeah.
rates versus expenditures, or why, did it make sense to allocate more LIHEAP to places with higher prices?
Yeah, well, in some ways it is baked into the calculation as to how states are allocated the funds. So essentially they think about the percentage of the population that is energy insecure. They also think about the housing conditions, and they think about the amount of money that is spent on fuel and electricity. So that essentially is baked in what are the prices of fuel. So that helps determine the allocation as it's designed.
Right, right. All right. There's a question. I think I get it. What evidence is there about the cost incidence of disconnection policies similar to those you highlighted? Do these policies increase social welfare? I'm not sure if this is a question about disconnection in general versus disconnection related to energy. Well, I mean, not paying your bill, I guess, can occur for many, many reasons. I guess cost incidence of disconnection policies. I guess that's the term of art. Is it if you can interpret
Yeah.
the question,
Well,
maybe
maybe
it
is the
means
question
it's
about the cost incidence of the policies or the cost incidence of disconnections?
cost incidence of disconnection policies.
Of policies, okay. Well, policies like LIHEAP are paid for by tax dollars, so it would be tax incidence. Similarly, state programs would be similar. I'm trying to think. Maybe I'll answer the question instead of just the cost for disconnections, since I think policies are mostly either who pays into utility bills or who pays into the government with taxes. But with disconnections themselves, I've been trying very hard actually to track costs of disconnections. So we have the costs of what happens at the home, and I flagged a few, right? You have disconnection fees, reconnection fees, registration fees. You might have to replace everything in your refrigerator, which could be anywhere from $40 to $300. Disconnection fees, I will say, anywhere from like $400 to $150. You may have legal services, you may have other costs that you incur in order to bring your children back into the home, for example. So that's the kind of the household cost, but it's very hard to get like quantifiable numbers on that. There's utility costs. So utilities, if one is unable to pay, they're in arrearage, they're disconnected, and there's no way to recover those funds, even if it goes to collection. The utility still has to absorb those costs. And the question is how, and it depends on the utility. Some utilities just entirely absorb it. Other utilities, it will then shift to part of what they have to recover for rates. So in a way, that's then a form of cross-subsidization, where the remaining customers who aren't disconnected are paying for those customers that were disconnected. And then finally, we have all the kind of societal costs, and these are costs such as like what we pay into social services and legal services, legal fees, even education costs to help these children that might be disconnected and struggling. So I don't know if this fully answers the question, but I would say there's this range of costs, but actually getting quantifiable estimates to put it into a compelling story, I found incredibly difficult to do.
Right. Yeah. I think trying to interpret the question might have something to do with, there's a cost to prevent, I don't know, disconnection, or perhaps a policy cost and a subsidy or something like this. And then there's the sort of benefits gained by the person, and maybe these benefits are particularly large to maintain someone's welfare in their house.
Yeah.
So
Which is
that's
why I think it'd be great to collect these numbers so that
still
we
so a future looking study to try to understand, I guess, perhaps.
That's exactly right.
All right, right. So, okay. There's a couple questions about just kind of generally about water bills and the same kind of just disconnection from water, or cost. I don't know, inability to pay for bills in general. Do you have any insights about how the cost of water, plays into this? And
I don't.
Mhm.
We engage with folks within the broader network of thinking about bill assistance and customer assistance who study water quite intensively. And it seems that there are very consistent themes across the different domains in terms of incidents of disconnection and some of the challenges for households that are recovering. I assume, but I haven't studied formally, that water is yet another one of those utilities that one has to balance, right? So if they're foregoing paying for something or they're bill balancing, water is one of those bills that they're balancing along with their rent or their mortgage and their medical costs and their food.
Right. Let's see. It's a question of sort of about, I don't know, energy efficiency, and perhaps I'll throw in demand response. Is this seen as something that is a viable solution to help, I guess, particularly low income households in terms of managing electricity, or is it just do we know if demand response at the residential level isn't, I guess, highly prevalent? Many places it exists. In some places like Austin here, you can have your thermostat turned down by the utility in the peak summer months.
Yeah.
If you would like, I don't think you get a really direct benefit too much on your bill for that. You're just sort of, taking one for the utility, the team. But is there what's anything about energy efficiency and demand response to help alleviate energy insecurity?
We presume that energy efficiency is a very important preventative solution as it's mixed with weatherization in particular. And this is something that our team is studying with a randomized control trial at present to see if the intervention of weatherization and energy efficiency actually helps change energy behavior as well as reduce energy insecurity. So stay tuned for that. In terms of demand response, I think it's important to recognize that the story of energy insecurity is just so nuanced, and no single metric really explains what these households might be living on a daily basis. And I think the coping story helps, or some of the coping details helps, but maybe I would point to work by Lucy Chu and Destiny Knock of thinking about the kind of the hidden forms of energy insecurity and how households might be living with temperatures that are just way too low or way too high in order to get by without adding to their bill, and that oftentimes our metrics that we use just don't account for this kind of severe curtailment. So I'm bringing this back to demand response, and just that I have some concerns with demand response if it's not appropriately designed and one doesn't appropriately understand what the household is going through, just to make sure that it's not like severe punishment for a household that's already struggling to get by, or that it's not predatory in certain households that one can assume that they can, reduce energy consumption for.
Right. Yeah, you're you're enlightening me on one of your slides about people that have medical equipment in their house, and so how that's a significant fraction. I don't know, maybe even half of the electricity consumption or something in the home is kind of large. To get to hundreds of dollars added, that's a large amount of electricity from that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So hard to demand response, that one.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. That's a good point.
So,
And maybe
yeah.
I'll note with this durable medical equipment, you may have insurance, you may have medical insurance that will help you pick up the original cost, like the upfront cost of these devices, but there's no insurance, like long-term insurance, that actually pays for the use of these devices. And doctors aren't trained to know how to prescribe one or the other for somebody who's energy insecure, right?
Yeah. Here's some couple of questions, I guess, related. I don't know if I'll throw it into the coping mechanism category for potentially being incorrect, but maybe a community kind of thing. So heating and cooling centers, I guess, places where people could go, particularly hot or cold, if it's really, unless it's an extreme winter thing and you can't get to the center. But do you have any insights how much these help with the energy insecure issue? I suppose, I don't know. If your house is actually disconnected, then clearly you would want to go somewhere else, but or if it helps prevent you from becoming connected because you don't run your house as much. But that sounds, not sure how feasible that is. But any insights into community heating, cooling centers?
I don't know if there's evidence I don't know if there are any studies out there that have looked at how much these facilities help people financially or help them medically, health-wise. I do know since the coping strategies paper, we've also asked questions on subsequent surveys about other strategies that people employ, and leaving the house and going somewhere cool is a very common strategy, right? You go to the mall, for example, or you go to any indoor facility that is low cost to get into. Cooling centers are a phenomenal way that local governments essentially can help these populations. I'd be shocked if they're not helping, but I don't know of a study that's actually looked at that specifically.
Yeah, might be a little tricky. Um, Here's one just kind of about things going on, and I suppose other countries, like countries in Europe. Is anybody doing this well that you're aware of, or where's the best places for doing it, even within the United States? You have any insights?
Yeah, I see this question here, James. Thank you. I really appreciate the question. I don't know. I'm not highly familiar with disconnection protections elsewhere. Though I do have a colleague, Shelley Welton, who has done some work in Europe on this and is working on it at present. So maybe stay tuned for her work as it comes out. In terms of states, there are several states that have recently modified their disconnection protections to account for extreme heat. Virginia is one that I'll highlight. Led by Representative Irene Shin, and it is kind of the full package in terms of protections. It's thinking about both the temperature and the date with no ambiguity as to which day, if you're fully protected or not. So that's Virginia, if I didn't say that. Virginia is a great example. I would say, just from kind of a cursory glance at all of the different disconnection protections, Rhode Island also has a lot of provisions that are quite progressive. And there's several other states too. We're actually working on a report that we'll put out in a few months that highlights some of these best practices and gives some model examples that states could pursue.
Right, great. And maybe we'll end with this one here, kind of a communication question. You highlighted an example of a perhaps overly wordy, confusing sounding metrified description of how a person could get some bill relief in Connecticut. But do you have how could programs be communicated effectively? How could people sign up for them effectively? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I suppose most people have mobile phones and we get community alerts and stuff like this. And maybe somebody can get an alert, say,
Exactly right.
if you're not signed up for this thing, you qualify, click here, or you probably qualify, click here, this kind of
Yeah.
thing. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think that's exactly right. We can use the device that we're all reliant on for everything else. We could send alerts, we could send pushes. We can also default people into these programs. So if they qualify for other programs such as SNAP or TANF, then they might automatically qualify for at least outreach for LIHEAP. Not that they're just handed the money, but they're at least put in the pool so that they know about it. And I think it's an all hands on deck kind of challenge. I think it's on government, it's on utilities, it's on everybody else to advertise that there are protections and that there is relief that is available, and to make that information known through devices and websites and everything else. So even utilities can advertise that these programs exist and can help people.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. This has been Sanya Carley, Mark Allen Hughes, Faculty Director of the Kleinman Center at the University of Pennsylvania. Thanks for speaking with us about energy and security on the UT Energy Symposium.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, everyone.